Right guys, what's happening? I hope you're all well. Today we're going to talk a little bit about training the abs, okay? So everyone wants thicker abs, everyone wants abs that look better. And people are dieting down time and time again and seeing that their abs aren't really changing even though they're training them. The problem is not that people aren't doing enough, it's that people are not doing it correctly, you know, like most muscle groups. And in order to understand how to train a muscle correctly, you need to actually understand how the muscle functions, what its job is, what its full range is, and what exercises are going to allow you to target that muscle optimally through that range. So one of the most common exercises that we see done is the hanging leg raise in an attempt to challenge the abs. Now, while at some parts in the range there may indeed be a challenge on the abs, it's probably not optimal and probably not the most productive use of your time in the gym when it comes to challenging the abs. It's the same when it comes to things like planks and whatnot. You know, doing a plank to train your abs is the equivalent of you saying that you're just going to hold a dumbbell at the bottom of a bench press for as long as you can, trying to build your chest. Now, you wouldn't do that, so why would you do the same with the abs? You know, these are the kind of things I want you to start thinking about. I want you to be able to think critically and to be able to tell me why you're doing the exercise you're doing. And you know, if you have a valid reason for that, then fair enough. But for most of us that are training for general hypertrophy, trying to make our muscles look a little bit better, we need to be smart. We need to train them through their full range with tension on them and then progressively overload through that range over time. So what we're going to do very quickly is look at where the abs attach and how that relates to their role. Because once you actually understand where muscles attach and you understand sliding filament theory, it's very easy to understand exercise, because these are the basic fundamentals. So firstly, let's take a look at Ozzy here. Okay, so as you can see, Ozzy's got this band hanging from him. I'm going to use this as your abs. So the abs are rectus abdominis, so they're the group of muscles here that you refer to as your six pack, depending on how many, you know, abdominal muscles you actually have in there. And they attach from the xiphoid process of the sternum, which is this pointy bit here, and the costal cartilages of ribs 5 to 7. So these little spongy things here, these are costal cartilages. So those muscles span from there down here to your pubic symphysis and pubic crest, okay? So around your genitalia, all right? So if you consider that, then that's where those muscles are pulling, okay? So that's the first thing you need to understand. That's where the muscles are pulling. And then the next thing that's absolutely key that you understand is the concept of sliding filament theory. You only need to know the very, very basics of this. You don't need to go into the specific structural proteins that make up muscles. If you can understand this much that I'm about to show you, it'll make sense why we do exercise, okay? So this is a muscle when it's lengthened, okay? So as you can see, this block and this block, they're separated from each other, okay? So they're your actin filaments, okay? So just remember that, they're your actin filaments, and then you've got this myosin in the middle, okay? So they're your two primary contractile proteins within a muscle. So that's when it's lengthened. As you can see, the two orange parts are apart, and then what happens when a muscle contracts is that this myosin, it's a bit more complicated, but to really simplify it, this myosin pulls them actin filaments in together, and as you can see, the muscle is now shorter. So this happens within all of the muscle cells that make up an individual muscle, and that's what produces muscle shortening. So muscle shortening is what actually makes a joint move, makes a movement happen. So if we take that logic of shortening over to the abs, then we realize that, you know, if we turn this to the side and this actually shortens, then what it's going to do is it's going to pull this rib cage down towards the pelvis. I don't want to break my skeleton, but it pulls the rib cage down towards the pelvis, or pulls the pelvis up towards the rib cage. So as you notice now, when we mentioned the attachment points, there was no mention of anything across the hip, okay? So the muscles, they don't pull on this leg, okay? So there's nothing pulling on this leg, yet you see people challenging the abs by doing things with their legs, kicking them up and down and all that. And then you can come back to me with the rationale of saying, okay, yes, the legs may not be involved directly in the movement, but they have an indirect, you know, loading mechanism by you forcing to hold your abs isometrically. So let's say you're lying on the ground doing flutter kicks, you know, and you're forced to actually counterbalance the leg movement by contracting your abs. Yes, that's absolutely true, but do you think that's going to have a significant growth stimulus? Again, it's like saying that we should just hold our pec still at the bottom of a dumbbell bench press to challenge the pec. It doesn't really make a whole pile of sense. So what we should actually be trying to do then is move this spine, okay? Because these intervertebral joints, these are the joints that we're actually looking to move when we challenge the abs, okay? So what we want to do is we want to shorten that so that the pelvis and the rib cage come closer together. That is the simplest means of thinking of an effective ab exercise, is this distance between the bottom of my rib cage and the top of my pelvis. It closes down. And if you test that on yourself, you'll notice that you can't actually go very far through that range. You know, we've got this much extension, and then we flex down and it's like this. And that's the abs truly challenged through their full range. So if we take that toward an actual exercise then, the kneeling cable crunch, which Paddy and Larry are going to demonstrate practically after this rather than me just talking theory, we'll have a look at it here on the whiteboard for a second first. So I hope you can see this, but this is our fully lengthened position, okay? So as you'll notice, if you can see this pelvis, the hips are in a position, and if you look at this, they're in the same position. The hips and the knees do not move during an ab exercise, okay? The spine moves. So, as you can see, we've got this resistance here at the top, which is the orange line, or a rope, as you'll see in a minute when they're doing that exercise. So the abs, this little orange line here, are lengthened in this position, and then over here, they're shortened. So this orange line has pulled that ribcage down towards the pelvis, and this resistance has now been pulled further away. So that's basically what they've done. What this dude here has done is just pull that resistance down. So guys, this is a really small range of motion that you're working through. The abs really don't work through a very big range of motion, yet you see people doing the most absurd of exercises through ridiculous ranges of motion trying to challenge the abs. It is unnecessary, okay? You need to actually take a step back and consider why you're doing the exercises that you're doing and whether or not you're being really efficient with your time. If you need to do 12 sets for abs, which I've seen, you're not challenging them appropriately, okay? And finally, okay, just like every other muscle in the body, we need to do a couple of things in order to get that muscle to grow, okay? We need to put tension on it. We need to then maintain that tension through its full range of motion, and then we need to progressively overload. We all do this for our chest, for our back, for our legs, but somehow the abs seem to have gotten like lost, and we just do these ridiculous exercises because we might have seen them on Rocky movies. It's not necessary, okay? So I'm gonna hand it over to Paddy and Larry. I don't know how I just spoke about 8 minutes on the theory of ab training, but hopefully you learned a thing or two that you can apply to your own training, and I'll let the lads take over from here. Right, so as we can see here, Paddy's performing the exercise that we just demonstrated in the diagram. So as you see from here, he's moving up into extension. That's the most amount of extension he can get. Then he's shortening those abs, closing down that distance between the rib cage and the pelvis. As you'll see, his hips and his knees are staying in the same position while the abs flex the spine. Okay, so that's all we're looking for here. We don't want to see any movements bigger than those shown here by Paddy in the video. I hope that was helpful, guys. Tune in again.